Recording. And then Tyson, I will turn it back over to you to introduce yourself and give us your presentation.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Tyson Bradley. I'm a mountain guide and director of guiding at Utah Mountain Adventures. Um, I've been guiding since 1994, not only in Utah, but also Mount Hood, Oregon, Denali in Alaska, Mount Rainier, and I've guided Amada Blanc in the Himalayas and Everest in the Everest region. And I've spent I've guided the Grand Teton over 100 times with Exum mountain guides in the Tetons, Mount Rainier, about 6 times by different routes. And my claim to fame was doing the first ski descent of the north face of Denali, the Wickersham Wall, in 1994. I'm also the author of a book, Backcountry Skiing Utah. So I am going to be talking about ice climbing more than backcountry skiing and ski mountaineering here, but they're closely related. Um, and so I'm sort of new to this series, of course, but my take on it is that I should mention a little bit about rules and regulations, which for the most part, there's not a whole lot of uh, official rules and regulations with mountaineering. It's one of the things that attracts free-spirited people. And the etiquette includes respect um, climbing routes and which are going to reduce risk not only for yourself but for the other. Um, an example in ice climbing is that if you climb that has the possibility to walk off or climb off a different way, that's considered better form than rappelling or being lowered back down the same route that you, especially in the case where other people might be coming up. Um, one of the routes that's one of the climbs that's most popular for water ice climbing in Utah is called the Great White Icicle in Little Cottonwood Canyon. Those of you that ski at Snowbird and Alta or in the backcountry have probably seen cars parked on cold December and January days around the power plant a few miles up, not too far from the gate buttress or Little Cottonwood. And when you get to the top of it, I can party. It's form.
Hey Tyson, sorry to interrupt. We're getting
Or
choppy audio again.
different.
Do you want to turn off your camera and see if we can get better audio?
Okay.
Thanks. Well, all right, he got kicked out again. We did this earlier, so when he comes back on, we'll have him keep his camera off. So his audio is a little bit better. So he's popped on now. So yeah, Tyson, go ahead and just keep your camera off, and then you can start again. I would just start from the beginning where you're talking about Little Cottonwood because it got pretty choppy up until then.
Okay. All right. Little Cottonwood, the Great White Icicle. That climb is best to climb it to the top if you can, and then walk off. Am I coming through okay now, Jamie?
Yeah, this sounds good.
Um, and then just communicating with other people is good etiquette, and sometimes we'll be moving unless they allow you to pass, and sometimes they will allow you to pass. And etiquette, maybe other things will come to mind as I go through some of my other notes here. But safety. I'm going to talk quite a bit about that as we go through different types of ice climbing and to get and then so hopefully prevent injury. For injuries, I'll mention the types of common injuries, and then for the most part, small parties on an ice climb have to just do the best they can for an injury, and then try to get to a higher level of care, such as yourselves. Sorry, can't seem to turn that completely off, but um, all right. So water ice is the main type of ice climbing we have in Utah. Another type of ice climbing that exists is alpine ice, where you're climbing up on bigger mountains. But with water ice means waterfall ice. So we're climbing in places like the Great White Icicle, that's basically a waterfall in summer. And probably the most common place to climb in Utah and the most reliable is Provo Canyon near the Bridal Veil Falls. And just to the looker's right of that is the Stairway to Heaven area, where there's a variety of different flows of ice coming down tiered. It's a limestone wall with different tiers, like a ledge and then a cliff and then a ledge. And and so there's an apron at the bottom, in other words, a spread out area of ice that's wide enough for many people to climb. Out and that check 5 pitch up to 5 pitch the fairway. Uh, in terms of safety, water ice, also a related type happens like mixed ice, but you may also be using your tools to hook or set the ice pick in a crack and pull up on the rock. So you're using your ice tools the rock to have uh, protection. You can clip bolts like a sport climber. Perhaps some of you are climbers in the summertime, mixed in and over climb is climbing where you have to create your own protection. Um, so some of the things, probably the number one thing we're doing with safety is trying to evaluate the stability of the ice in the first place. We've had a hard time, honestly, in recent years with the global weirding, whatever you want to call it, global warming, change in the climate. We are not seeing sustained, stable ice very frequently the last 2 seasons, and that's kind of been a trend overall. We have had seasons where we can climb from December through March, and usually it seems like historically over the last 31 years that we've been running this guide service, we've had a fair amount of ice climbing and stable ice in at least December and January, mid-December to mid-January being the most reliable time. But we've had a real hard time in recent years because of temperature fluctuations, and we haven't felt it was safe to even go to an ice formation. Um, and what you're interested in when you're going there is are we going to be able to avoid rock fall? and ice falling down while we're there, as well as the possibility of avalanching. Um, so, those kinds of things can be just related to the temperature profile. Let's say you're planning to get out on Saturday. If you watch the temperatures through the week, you want the temperatures to mostly be below freezing, especially at night. And then during the day, if the temperatures get above freezing, you sort of have to, and they stay above freezing, you have to get off the ice. If you show up to climb ice and it's actually precipitation in the form of rain, typically that's a deal breaker, and you're not gonna stick around. Just too much probability of the ice falling down and be when it's too warm and it's in the melt phase. So once you've decided to go to an ice crag and climb, then you're also going to evaluate the stability of the ice itself on a given formation. You're trying to choose a formation where the ice is thick, like 6 inches or more, 10 inches, multiple feet thick sometimes. What we need to make the ice thick is a water source, and it actually doesn't hurt to have a little bit of melting and freezing, but basically snow on the ground really helps. Sometimes we have a very dry early winter in November and December, not much snow, and especially at lower altitudes, where the most of our ice climbing here in Utah is at lower altitudes. There's just a few smears of ice up on the Twin Peaks by Snowbird and other places, but they tend to get covered by snow pretty quickly. But at these in Provo Canyon and Lower Little Cottonwood, where we do the most climbing, we sometimes don't have enough snow to melt to create the ice early in the season. Um, but once there's snow on the ground, then we can get ice forming, and once it's thick enough, whereas we're climbing the ice itself, then we'll be evaluating for where the part of the formation to climb where the ice is the thickest. Um, Yeah, so as far as evaluating the rockfall problem, it's really about timing. It's quite often the case that you'll be climbing in the morning and then feel uncomfortable with staying after, say, midday, 1 p.m., something like that. It might be getting too warm. Earlier in the winter, where we have less sun hitting the ice formations, and we're in these lower in these canyons with temperature inversions, that the ice can form up pretty solid. Later in the season, it can be more hit and miss, and we may have to leave early. Um, Something that helps a lot with the rockfall is if there is snow stuck on the ledges. So when ice falls from above, whether it's from a climber knocking it loose while they're swinging their tools, or it's just naturally falling, how far it goes depends a bit on whether there's powdery snow to stop it. If there's no snow on the ledges, the ice hits the rocks and just kind of shatters and keeps going. If there's soft snow on the ledges, that can stop the rocks and ice from making it further down. So that's kind of a positive thing for us is when there's some soft snow there to catch the rocks. On the Great White Icicle, we're sort of in a funnel. We're subject to the people above us, and if they knock something from way above, it can go 500 feet. An etiquette thing that this brings me to is that if you knock ice down, it's kind of like in the summer, if you're hiking, you knock a rock, you shout rock. Same thing with ice, you shout ice. And if you're knocking ice and it's more than you expected or a lot of ice, you can say big ice. Um, So some of the safety things you can do once you've decided to go on a route is plan ahead. Make sure you have enough rope for the longest rappel if you're doing a multi-pitch that doesn't have a walk-off. That's the case with the Stairway to Heaven climb. You need typically two ropes to rappel off it, even though one rope is enough for each pitch on the way up. You want to make sure you have enough rope to get back down. Um, And headlamps are a good idea, as well as, of course, a first aid kit with the basics. but the headlamps, the days are short in December and January. And certainly, two pairs of gloves. Our gloves get wet when we're ice climbing, and cold fingers, frostbite, those are things that are high probability of injuries for ice climbing. Um, okay, so another type of mechanism of injury for ice climbing is if the leader falls. Um, Basically, the way to prevent this, ice climbing is not like rock climbing where it's kind of okay to push yourself hard enough to fall on a rock climb, and especially a bolted rock climb. It's considered kind of good etiquette to push yourself and not just when you're finding a move difficult, you ask your belayer to take on the rope and you just hang. It's good etiquette to try hard and climb until you fall when you're in a safe, relatively safe rock climbing environment with bolted anchors. But it's different with ice climbing. It's better not to fall if you're the leader. There's a lot of sharp, pointy stuff, crampons and two ice tools, and typically, it's pretty likely to have one of the crampons hit the ice and cause an ankle injury if you fall as a leader. Because you're going to go back to the most recent ice screw and then back past that for as far, let's say you were 10 feet above your last ice screw and you fell, you would be basically going 20 feet plus a little bit of rope stretch. The ice screws are pretty good for protection, but they're not foolproof. Um, but that's a common ice climbing injury is broken ankle because of the crampon points. Your crampon points hit the rock or hit the ice rather, and they stop you dead, and your body weight keeps momentum keeps going down. So I had the misfortune of meeting a person on Mount Rainier down near the base who had broken both of their ankles, and they were quite far hike out off of Mount Rainier, doing just an small pitch of ice to get on the Liberty Ridge. They had fallen and actually hit rock and broken the ankles. So that's a problem with it. Also, puncture wounds from the ice tools that might be hitting you as you're falling. Um, and then just kind of hanging on. In general, when you fall, you should push away from the rock, and in the ice, it's the same thing. You should probably push away to get less injured. Um, but ultimately, you want to try to avoid falls. You want to make sure you've placed ice screws before you're too tired, and ideally from a ledge. Ice climbers use rests to stop and kind of get off their front points for a while and turn their foot sideways so they can have their front and heel points in for kind of to rest their calf muscles. Your calf muscles get incredibly burned out, as do your fingers and your forearms from gripping the ice tools. Um, you're going to try to swing your tools towards little divots in the ice, aiming fairly precisely with your swing, not just randomly. And you want to be careful that you don't swing your ice tool right at the bulging ice. That's much more likely to break off and create what we call dinner plates, pretty big chunks of ice all around where you've struck with your ice tool. That'll tend to go pretty far down and threaten your belayer or your other parties below you. Um, Another thing a leader has to remember is the final move after climbing the steep ice, the final move onto the ledge can be quite awkward and dangerous because, well, you've got a lot of ice, you've got a long way down to fall. And also, the ice is often not very solid on the ledge at the top. It might be what we call snice, snow ice, but not solid ice. And you might be kind of scratching on some gravelly rocks or something like that as you pull yourself in what's called a mantle move up away from the vertical ice onto the ledge. That transition can be a kind of a dicey move, and it's good to get an ice screw in just below the top. Probably the majority of accidents in all kinds of mountaineering and perhaps in life in general are due to sort of a human factor and a lack of clear communication. We want clear, concise, accurate communication between a belayer and a leader. We don't want any surprises. A plan in advance that you're going to get to the top and then be lowered back down, or that you're going to stop at the top and belay the second up to you. and or if you're going to rappel. So this stuff should be planned in advance, and communication should be clear and concise, and there could be no surprises. There should be no surprises. But it's definitely happened plenty of times where a person that was belaying dropped a person that was climbing on a lower, or somebody dropped the rope when they're at the top, and oftentimes due to poor communication and clear, concise, effective communication is very important for safety. Um, so when you're the second following, you are also subject to some risk. Obviously, it's safer because the rope is above you, and the belayer above can keep the right rope tight, or if you're top roping at the ground, can keep the rope tight on you as you go up. Um, but one of the things that can be a concern is if the leader goes up and then moves off to the side to a belay stance. Typically, our belay stances are not right in the fall line. We do our best to set up our belay stance to the side of where the ice would fall. Um, so a protected alcove underneath the rock, perhaps, or just off to the left or right of the main line. So if you're climbing a pitch and then you're going to move off, for example, on the Great White Icicle on the bulge pitch, you need to place an ice screw at the top of the bulge. Even though the climbing is easy for you above that, you're placing this ice screw to protect the second so that they won't have a pendulum swing if they fall below there and swing all the way off to the side, because the fall line below where you're going to be belaying from is different from the main fall line of the ice formation. Um, Another problem that can create can create quite a few compounding problems is dropping your ice tools, and this has happened. We pretty much don't necessarily have our ice tools attached to ourselves, but there are systems of kind of bungee type of cords that can keep your ice tool attached to you. And on large multi-pitch climbs, it's a pretty good idea. They're sort of in the way for your climbing. It's a little bit easier if you don't have to worry about these tethers, but it's going to solve that problem of potentially dropping your ice tool and finding yourself up on a ledge high up a ice climb with only one tool. The crampons are also super important. When you start out a climb at the bottom, make sure your crampons are really good and there's no like snow in between your boot sole and the metal of the crampons. And try a few steps front pointing with your toes, putting pressure on the crampons before you leave the ground to make sure they're on right. Um, so a lot of these, sort of injuries from ice climbing are related to the ice falling. One example that I was subject to was a person that I was working with, the other guide. Ice came from above and it hit her in the face, basically between her mouth and her nose. And it caused pretty much a full vertical tear of the skin right there in a sensitive area. And tons of bleeding, as you can imagine, from your lips, right above your upper lip, and so, and that was a case where it's kind of a very visible part of a person, and we wanted to get to a clinic as soon as we could. Basically, the best we could do really was just lower her down and put a bunch of bandages, absorbent gauze there on the lip and have it kind of, taped on the best we could, but very makeshift type of way of kind of controlling the bleeding and then getting her down and then getting her like as quickly as possible to a clinic for higher level care. Uh, and so then, other problems with the ice falling. I'll go into those a little bit. I'm going to move to a climbing, which is alpine ice climbing. I mean, I guess I'll be moving a little bit away from some of the typical Utah ice climbing, but maybe are there questions regarding some of the stuff I've covered so far? All right. Well, alpine ice basically means up on the mountains, not down in the lowers, like where we have our ice climbing here down in the canyons. So places like the Grand Teton has alpine ice climbs. Mount Rainier has the Liberty Ridge, a really classic long, basically 4,000 foot ice climb. It's not as steep. A lot of times the alpine ice climbs are going to be less steep than vertical. Our ice climbs in Provo Canyon, those are pretty vertical, and some of the mixed climbs are overhanging. Alpine ice tends to be easier, lower angle, but the ice can be harder. And there's a lot of other concerns that you don't have when you're on a climb fairly close to the ground. There's, alpine ice climbing is very popular in gullies and such in Alaska, in the Alps, more sort of wetter maritime climates compared to our dryish climate here in Utah. Um, Occasionally in the high Uintas, in early season, a kind of a dry, cold fall, we'll have some alpine ice routes that form up like Bald Mountain, Reed Peak area of the Uintas. And in Colorado, in the San Juans and such, there can be some long ice gullies that form up. Alpine ice and mixed alpine ice climbing, where you're using your crampons and ice tools on a mix of rock and snow and ice. These are forms of mountaineering. Water ice climbing is sort of mountaineering, but it's a 1 day trip, and it's kind of closer to the roads. At least in Utah, there's plenty of places where you have to hike in, such as Montana, a very popular place for ice climbing. You have to hike in a few miles. But the point is, with mountaineering, uh, the types of injury and alpine ice climbing include avalanches, rockfall, slips and falls, altitude sickness, cold injuries, dehydration, fatigue. Kind of the things that you would think of for being out in the high mountains. And your main approach to this is just be proactive about taking care of yourself. Eat, drink, breathe. Use pressure breathing to get as much air in when the air is rarefied at altitude. And in terms of avalanches, when you're in ice climbing, water ice climbing, sort of, I mean, mixed alpine ice climbing terrain, you're often around glaciers, and glaciers, towers of ice called seracs can fall over on a glacier, and that huge amount of weight can impact a lower angle snowy slope and cause a slab avalanche. That is the sort of thing that killed one of our alpine climbing heroes, Alex Lowe, on Shishapangma in the Himalayas in 1999. Um, as far as like the cold injuries with fingers from ice climbing, you got to expect that. And basically, the program is you're swinging. You might be holding on with your left hand, and then you let go of your tool while it's in a secure place with your right hand, and you swing that right hand and try to force the blood down the brachial artery and into your fingertips. Pretty basic stuff. Being proactive, staying ahead of it before you get to the point where you can't feel your fingers, and then you might get a placement with your right hand and then swing your left hand. So you've got to be proactive and make sure you continue to feel the same thing with your toes. Your toes are squished into the front of your boots, and you're kicking into the ice. Your toes and your fingertips are going to be really cold, and if you are climbing a pitch and then belaying, it's common to switch over to a much looser fitting, more comfortable pair of gloves or even mittens while you're belaying or in between climbs. Um, Typically, you do get pretty warm while you're climbing a pitch, but then you can put on a puffy jacket while you're belaying. Um, So other things that we're thinking about with mountaineering and injury prevention is safe approaches to the climb. We want to think about where would an avalanche or ice fall or rock fall. It usually kind of heads down gullies and stuff. So when you're approaching to an alpine climb, you want to look at this and um, try to climb up avalanche resistant terrain like ridges, high ground, kind of maybe not right underneath the main face. Ideally, you avoid climbing during or right after a significant snowstorm or a big warming trend. Unusually high temperatures cause unusual avalanches, and avalanche is not completely rocket science. You get snow, you get avalanches. Get a bunch of snow, gets a big snowstorm, you can assume avalanching is going to occur. Um, and then another good program for alpine climbing is to start early and climb in the morning. And what can be a little bit surprising about some alpine climbs is that they're safer to do in later, some alpine climbs at high altitude, such as on the Grand Teton, the Black Ice Couloir, and alpine ice routes can be safer to climb in mid to late summer to early fall rather than in early season. In early season, in spring, April, May, often there's too much snow still on top of the ice itself, and you're not getting a solid purchase. You're having to maybe excavate through the annual snow to get to the solid permanent ice. And you're also subject to more avalanche risk that time of year. Um, so generally later in the summer, it's more secure. You may have more rockfall concerns, but you're going to have more solid ice. Um, in the Alpine, if you're climbing in the big mountains, Himalayas, Alaska, you don't want to camp where avalanche can occur, where ice can fall. Your exposure time is very long at a camp, so you don't want to be in a place where there's a gully above you. You prefer to camp below kind of a ridge. You would if you come across a campsite that looks like a good spot, but yet it's littered with debris from rocks that have fallen or chunks of ice or snow avalanche debris, then that tells you it's not a safe place, and you want to choose a different places to camp on big alpine climbs. Um, and sometimes you have to climb longer than you wanted to get to a safe spot. In general, try to select ridges that you can climb on as opposed to gullies. But the reality is that a lot of the good climbing on alpine routes forms up in gullies where the water flows. Um, so I think I talked a little bit about this previously, but with ice and rockfall, the position of the belayer is very important, and and then the leader calls out if they knock rock or ice. If there's bystanders, if there's people who've come along to maybe take a few pictures, or they're wanting to just wait their turn to do a top rope climb, for example, they need to be put in a good, safe place. Sometimes that would be on a little bit of a ridge that's nearby or distance away from the base of the climb. Um, and then just off to the side out of the fall line um, can help a lot. Uh, there have been some twisted ankles and injuries from people just approaching to the vertical water ice climbs themselves. It's good to wear the crampons and climb carefully, especially if there's powder rocks on climbing up the apron to get to the Provo climbs, for example. Um, so yeah, I think that I talked about one injury to the face, so bruises, lacerations. Certainly, wearing a helmet is standard procedure. There are also eye injuries from falling rock or small bits of ice. And one of my friends had a pretty bad eye injury, kind of a injury to one of his eyes that's permanent. It's not blind, but it's not ever going to be the same again. And he feels like he could potentially have stopped that small piece of rock, which fell from quite far above, but it could have been deflected by a baseball hat or sunglasses. Seems kind of basic, but glasses to protect your eyes are not a terrible idea. You'd rather damage the glasses than damage your eye. It's hard to wear a baseball hat, but the baseball bill does does stop the ice fall, and it can anyway. It can block it. A lot of the ice is not huge pieces, but falling from far above, picking up a lot of momentum. So other types of injuries are related to slips and falls. So a fair amount of the time, you might be able to choose between using a rope and belaying a pitch or soloing. The more often you use the rope, then probably the less likelihood of having a fall with no rope on that could be really disastrous. But there's a trade-off there because you move quicker without having to belay, and sometimes speed is safety in the mountains. But generally speaking, if you're using the rope and you're belaying pitches, you're placing ice screws, and sometimes you're using natural rock protection stoppers and cams, slings on horns. If partners are soloing on alpine ice, which is quite often the case on stuff that's maybe uh, 60 degrees, 65 degrees, 50 degrees, this kind of slope angle, you can feel quite secure and you can solo. If you're soloing, keep in mind that you generally are better off staying close together as partners if rather than being one far above the other. Because if a person far above knocks something down, the other person can it can hit the other person below, and it will have picked up some momentum at that stage. Um, and speaking of just injury potential, keep in mind that descending is probably a lot more accidents happen on descending off of a mountain or a ice climb than on the way up. Um, An example of this is on the Great White Icicle. We do prefer if people traverse across to the west after climbing it and then walk off. Well, when I say walk off, that means basically down climbing a route that's easier, going down a different way. So you're not subjecting those below you that are coming up to any ice fall or problems, but you are yourself having to keep your guard up until you get all the way down to safe flat ground. There's a tendency to reach the top of the hard climbing and let breathe a sigh of relief and then climb a little bit more quickly on the way down. And it's important actually to keep your guard up on the way down. And if the if you're climbing down and it's mostly snow and you're able to move fairly quickly, then you have to watch out for places where right underneath the snow there might be ice. And sometimes people have had trouble down climbing on lower angle ice because they can't keep their foot flat and they don't want to face in and front point down because that's pretty slow. So those are some of the things that I had in my notes here. And yeah, I think load and go, packaging people and getting them out pretty quick. Certainly, um, injuries include, like I've said, the broken ankle, also other broken bones with, legs and arms, and certainly concussions can happen with ice hits and with rock fall. Um, on most of these things, it's sort of a judgment call at the time as to how you can get the person out most efficiently. A lot of these places, really hard to get a helicopter in there for any kind of an extrication. It'd be much better to self evacuate, self rescue, walk off. I think bringing a ski pole to the base of a climb is a good idea, even if you don't really feel like you need it to help if somebody's tweaked an ankle. Kind of use it as a crutch. Um, and usually, you've got the equipment with you, a SAM splint, and a few other things to do some sort of a splinting of a broken limb, um, and support it as best you can to get down. Obviously, stopping bleeding, and with a concussion, stop climbing and get down, sit down for a while, and then try to get down, and go see more advanced care. Um, Yeah, so I think I've talked about common basic medical care for common injuries during these activities. What questions might folks have?
Tyson, thank you so much. You guys can feel free to come off mute, put questions in the chat. I did have a question for you, Tyson, as one of the other things that spurred this is I was at a conference earlier this year. And I'm going to guess you're probably familiar with this story, but they talked about a story in Uinta Basin where the person climbing, and I'm going to guess is because you talked about how it's the ice can be a little bit more dangerous on that ledge as you're going up, and talking about how when they hit that top part and put their ice tool in, the whole wall of ice fell down, crushing one of the people at the bottom,
Mm,
and actually like injured him at the same time because he got thrown coming down, as they're coming out. So just thinking about anything that you can watch for, or because I guess this was big. This is like 20 feet diameter, huge whole chunk of ice.
yeah,
So just wondering, like just
yeah,
especially dangerous spot, anything that you want to tell people to be most careful of. I think this was a little valley, so there wasn't a great, I think they were in a safe place that they thought, but because it was such a small area, probably it just didn't matter because the ice chunk was so huge.
yeah. Yeah, the ice, when curtains of ice or whole pillars of ice fall, that's like far more weight than anybody could sustain getting hit by. And if you're climbing and you're clipped to it with an ice screw, boy, it's pretty much curtains. But the things you can look for is, for example, any fracturing of the ice. If you're planning to climb, like we talk about them as pillars of ice, kind of somewhere where a waterfall slows and it flowed and it froze and it may not be connected to the wall behind it. There's like an overhanging cave behind it or such. But any time when you have one of these pinnacles of ice and you see horizontal fracturing across the thing, that's telling you that it's subject to falling. Um, Multiple days without a refreeze at night, subject to the ice itself falling down. If you see smaller hanging, maybe like hanging icicles breaking off and falling down as you're working your way up, you should take that into account and try to try to maybe turn around yourself and get down, get out of the way. Um, so a lot of it is just sort of trying to assess the solidity of the ice and make conservative decisions about getting off of and out from under ice before it falls. But yeah, that that last move can be a hard one, but there's many other places where you can get trouble. One thing that I could mention here that ice climbers do is a lot of it's more subtle than we think. Like when you're swinging your tools, you're not necessarily swinging like you would a swinging a hammer. You're not swinging always super hard. You're using precision, and sometimes you're doing what's called hooking, where you're just placing your curved ice pick on a little divot in the ice or a little kind of a ledge or something like that, and you're really just sort of pulling it down a little bit to set it, and then you're pulling up on that. Um, you're trying to keep 3 points connected to the the ice formation at all times. 2 feet in your left hand while you move your right hand up, move your feet up, and then move your other hand up, that sort of thing. Um, but evaluating the ice itself and make sure being confident that it's not going to fall is really a kind of the thing you have to do. The best thing you can do to avoid these kind of accidents that you're talking about, but it can be
Tyson,
hard to do.
I've got a question because how does somebody even get started in this? Say you're not really an avid climber, but this is something you want to try. Do you need to become a climber first? What is the process of getting into ice climbing?
Well, I mean, Utah Mountain Adventures takes a lot of people ice climbing for sort of their first and potentially the one time they'll do it. We do get a fair amount of people that find out that there's ice climbing in Utah and they're just so curious, they just want to try it. And sometimes we'll literally climb one pitch and people will be like, "That's great. I can go back to LA and tell everybody I climbed ice." And bit like jumping out of an airplane, and parachuting down or something. It's like that thing on people's sort of to-do bucket list or whatever. But people that are so we have introduction ice classes, but we also take private parties ice climbing that'll often be kind of just looking to try it once, not continue with it. But you've got a huge climbing community in Utah, and lots of these people are getting into ice climbing, and they'll hire Utah Mountain Adventures, or they'll start with like an intro to ice climbing course with us, and then they might take a intermediate or advanced ice climbing, or a mixed ice climbing class, or a multi-pitch ice climbing class. Um, Most people, even if they've learned from guides, part of the time are also going to try to latch onto some mentors. It's really great to climb with a mentor that knows more than you do, has been at it a while. Not always that easy to find someone like that wants you to take you under their wing, but it can be a pretty rewarding experience for a mentee and mentor to share what you know with somebody is and see them climb well, or maybe get to the point where they pass you up after a while is kind of cool. You feel like you're a little part of their success. So as I've kind of been in that role a lot more recently in my at this stage of my guiding career. So mentoring is very important to get into it, and I think most people before they ice climb have rock climbed. A lot of people have done alpine climbing, like Mount Rainier, maybe by a standard route, and they saw the ice and they're intrigued by it and they want to move to this new direction. So those are some ways to get into ice climbing. Definitely, most people are going to top rope at first. They're going to follow somebody who else has put up the rope, and then lead climbing is definitely more advanced skill that you progress to.
Yeah, I think about this. I'm like, man, I'm just thinking about how easy my calves activate just on jump roping. So when you talk about like your calves and your forearm fatigue, I was like, I don't know about that, but I can see because I was looking up some of the gear that you were talking about as you were going through, is I can see how that would fatigue very quickly with holding on um, and thinking about just the injuries that we would see at the hospital afterwards, especially when you're talking about cold injuries, avalanches, fatigue, and dehydration, I think would be a big one if people are not planning on the fact that there is cold weather dehydration is a real thing. So,
Yeah, and there's tricks you can do like when you're ice climbing to try not to get so cold, and try to not to get so tired. You try to hang on skeletal structure, keep your elbows straighter instead of chicken winged. Try to keep most of your weight on your feet, even if you have a great thunk with your ice tool and you think, man, I just want to pull up on this thing. It feels so solid. Make sure you're pushing with your feet and constantly, like a rock climber, you're constantly looking down to see where to put your feet. Good climbers keep their weight on their feet and save their arms for when they really need them. And swing judiciously and find the good places. We do tend to use on popular ice climbs. We'll use the exact same ice tool placements as the people that climbed above us. And a lot of times, an ice climb like the Great White Icicle might be what we call stepped out, where you can sort of see footsteps that people have almost kicked in the ice as they've gone up, and
okay,
you can follow in those.
okay. And that's not like a more weak spot over time.
Not always. No, it's often a little bit. It can be a little weaker if the ice is thin, but it also can be a place where it's just a lot easier for you to move up using the same spot that another person did, and you're a little bit less likely to knock ice. So it can be etiquette-wise a better. It can be considered a more cool thing to do for the others around you than trying a new line where you have to pioneer the line and knock a bunch of ice down before you get the route in.
Okay.
That the first pitch of the Great White Icicle has thin ice typically, and it's a place where we can only climb place our shortest climbing screws most of the time, which are like 11 centimeters. The longer 22 centimeter ice screws, the longer the ice screw is basically, and the deeper you can screw it into the ice, the more secure it is. But you have to make sure you're getting it into solid ice and not sort of ice with little air pockets here and there. If you place an ice screw and you can't get it all the way into the hilt, you can just put a clove hitch, a piece of webbing or purlon, onto the flush with the surface of the ice as deep as you can get it, and then you can clip that, and that's your pro. It doesn't have to be all the way in to be solid, to be safe, or better than nothing anyway.
All right, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions for Tyson? Like I said, feel free to come off mute, put it in the chat.
I think they're just all asleep at this point. No, kidding.
No, I think that's great. Like I said, I'm sorry that we couldn't get your face on here more, but glad that we could hear you as well. So thanks for everybody for coming. Thank you so much, Tyson. I appreciate you taking this time. Um, and hopefully, yeah, it's with the warmer weather, people aren't out there climbing ice, but I'm sure we'll see it. But yeah, I appreciate
It's
your
definitely
time. Go ahead,
for
sorry.
this year. The ice climbing in the canyons is definitely over for this year, but come see us next year. Spread the good word about Utah Mountain Adventures.
Well, and you guys do stuff all year long, so right, you're not. I don't think you're ever
Yes.
not busy, right? Okay.
No, we're busier in the winter than any other time, but we keep rock climbing all through the summer, and we're doing a fair amount of mountaineering this time of year, climbing mixed routes like Toledo Peak and Superior and Pfeiffer Horn.
Okay.
So,
Well, fantastic. Well, again, thank you so much. Thanks for everybody that joined. Like I said, we'll send everybody the email with the link for your questions for your continuing education. And everybody stay safe and have a great rest of your day.